Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, whatever it happens to be for you. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Ron Levine from Mindfulness in Blue Jeans, and I've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for 25 years. I started during a time when I was dealing with clinical anxiety and depression and a raging panic disorder that had blown up into agoraphobia. So I was unable to leave the house. I was on disability from work and happened to get paired up with a psychologist who, even back in 1998, had been teaching and practicing mindfulness and insight meditation for several decades. And that was my introduction to this practice. I did not expect that it would have any effect whatsoever. I thought it was a waste of time. But I gave it a shot anyway. It was all I had at the time, and I was sitting at home panicking all day anyway, so I was like, all right, might as well give it a shot, right? Well, geez, it worked out a little better than I expected. And here I am. And thank you for being with me. This is the next in our ongoing series of Calming Anxiety by Living Mindfully, where I share some of the tips and techniques that people have shared with me over the years, ones I've come up with for myself, as we all deal with this quirk of the human condition. It's anxiety, angst, right? So let's go ahead and jump in with today's edition, okay? I always like to begin my sitting by imagining I am suspended from the ceiling by a piece of string attached to the top of my head, as a nice cue to sit up straight without adding any extra tension to do so. And any tension that might be here, mental tension, emotional tension, physical tension, that is allowed to be here. Tension is allowed. Tension is a part of life sometimes. Where we often run into trouble is when we try to make it so that it is not part of life. And how do we typically do that? Well, we typically do that by trying to force the tension away in some way. And what is force but directed tension, right? So we're going to bring some tension to tension that's already here in an attempt to get rid of tension. Never worked for me. Not once. So if there's some tension here, we notice, oh, there's some tension here. This is what it's like. Oh, and I'm having a reaction to that, maybe not wanting it to be here. Here's what that's like. If there's a lack of tension here, just as well. Oh, there's a lack of tension here. This is what that's like. Here's my reaction to it. Here's what that's like. So let's take a moment and just notice what we have here with us today. However it is. And perhaps our reactions to whatever we have here with us today, however those might be. And if you haven't already, you might begin to bring your attention to your breathing. Notice if your breathing changes when you bring your attention to it. Maybe deliberately, maybe without intending to. The same way we can notice what we've brought with us today in terms of tension, lack of tension, the reactions to tension or lack of tension. We can notice the breathing we have brought with us today, however it is. And our reactions to however it is. Perhaps thinking it needs to be different, needs to be a certain way for our meditation practice, right? Which it doesn't. Our meditative breath is simply the breath that's here while we're meditating. We can notice the breathing we've brought with us, however it is. We can notice our feelings about it, our reactions to it, however they are. We can allow our breathing to be with our feelings about it. Now, one of the techniques that I like to use when I'm feeling particularly overwhelmed, not just overwhelmed, but the kind of overwhelmed where it starts to feel suffocating, crushing. I get this mental image that I'm in this completely spherical room. And I'm up against one of the walls. If you consider it a wall, completely spherical room. It's all wall, right? But up against one of the sides. And the entire room is filled by this balloon. So you've got this spherical room with this enormous balloon just filling the entire room, and I'm sandwiched between this balloon and the wall on one side. So I feel trapped. But again, it's a balloon. So it's malleable. It yields, right? I'm not actually in danger. It's just very uncomfortable. If anything, more psychologically than physically. And I kind of see myself in an attempt to get some space for myself, that I start pushing against this balloon. And of course, what happens when you push on one part of a balloon, but the parts around it pop out, right? So here I am pushing into the balloon, and the parts around my hands, because of that displacement, are now popping out right back into me again. Kind of making it worse. And then at some point, I realize, this ain't working. Large part of this practice is experimentation. Without experimentation, we couldn't engage in a practice of mindfulness and insight meditation. So, all right, I'm engaging in a certain cause and condition that's resulting in a certain effect that isn't good. So what should I try instead? And then I just kind of stretch my arms out, like I'm going to give this giant balloon a hug, as if I could get my arms around it. And I just let my hands and my arms rest. Against the surface of this balloon. Still not necessarily comfortable. But at least I'm not wasting my energy at this point. And I'm not pushing on one part of the balloon just to have another part next to it pop out and smack me in the face, right? So, some improvement. And then I notice I can just feel what the texture is like. Feel the texture of this balloon on my hands. And then begin to notice how the balloon shifts with my breathing. As parts of my body expand and contract. Perhaps to a small degree, perhaps to a large degree. Again, breathing doesn't have to be a certain way. Just noticing however the breathing is and however the body is shifting in accordance with that. Well, the balloon is shifting with that too. Not like the shifting before when I was pushing against it and it's pushing back at me. This is just a more subtle movement. I can notice, the balloon's up against me. It's not fighting me. It felt like it was fighting me when I was fighting it. Most of the fights that we end up with in life are the ones that we brought with us. we'll always find a fight when we go looking for one. And I just breathe with this balloon. This balloon that I thought was a threat for a while. Now I realize, no, it's just a frickin' balloon. It's air. Same air I'm breathing in and out. And I find that things start to ease to the point where my mind actually might start to wander a little bit. I just bring it back to the breathing, feeling the balloon. Funny how it's still there, but now that I've changed my relationship with it, I almost start forgetting about it. Turns out it wasn't such a problem when I stopped making it one. Funny how that is. And as I continue to breathe with the balloon and allow things to ease in their own time, because again, we can't force things to ease, right? Doesn't make any sense. Just have to set the conditions for them to do so. And that's what we're practicing here. We don't get to say when or how it unfolds, but at some point, I realize that if it wasn't for the balloon, I wouldn't be up against the side of this spherical room. I'd have slid to the bottom. Ironically, this balloon is actually supporting me. But I couldn't see that until I allowed it to do so. Until I allowed myself to allow it to do so. I just breathe with that support. As you go through the rest of your day or your evening, check in and notice, is there a balloon here? Maybe you're in a spherical room with a huge balloon. Maybe you've just got a smaller balloon you're carrying around with you. Maybe a balloon that you've been carrying for years you didn't even realize. You just check it out. Hey, what's this like? Not necessarily trying to pop it or destroy it or even drop it. Just checking it out. Hey, what's this like? What's this feel like? And just see what happens from there. Maybe something. Maybe nothing. The point is the inquiry. Gathering data. And in my experience, as we continue to inquire, gather data, we get better and better at learning how to set more skillful causes and conditions in place to get those better effects. And that's really the entirety of building our spiritual path. Thank you, everyone. I will hang on for a few moments if anyone would like to share anything in the chat. From Ava, constant nervousness and stress, inability to make decisions. What can I do about it? Great question. There's a lot there. The first thing is something that you've kind of already done, which is recognizing the issue. One of the circular challenges of unclear seeing is that we might not know we have unclear seeing because we have unclear seeing. And nervousness, anxiety, stress, these are things that, to use a phrase, cloud our vision, right? Unclear seeing. And they do affect our ability to make decisions. So first off, it's good that you've recognized that. You have some clarity here. You have enough clarity to recognize, hey, my clarity may need some improvement. So you've got something to work with there, right? I think from a practical standpoint, recognizing that these things, nervousness and stress and so forth, may be affecting your decision making. First off, you can use that in your practice. Simply being with the experience of nervousness and stress, which is really the entirety of my early days in this practice when I was dealing with panic disorder and agoraphobia. I mean, my entire life was, I had no respite, no break, no relief from stress and panic and anxiety. And a lot of that, to get back to what I was talking about during the sitting about a fight, I was fighting all that stuff. I was fighting my panic. I was fighting my anxiety. And what was the result of that? Well, I was wasting a shit ton of energy, and I was also making it worse. And part of why I was making it worse was because I was wasting all that energy. So I was fighting with this stuff, and it was giving me a fight right back, right? And it was a huge turning point in my practice in those early days when I was given the guidance of, okay, sit and look at the stuff, feel it, stop fighting with it, which easier said than done. I mean, I was terrified of it, which is why I was fighting it so hard. So this was not an easy thing. This was something I had to feel my way into, like the balloon, right? But as I sat with it, literally, as well as my meditation practice was certainly not just on the cushion. I was experiencing panic all the time. So it didn't matter what I was doing. I was practicing all the time. As I worked with it, sat with it on and off the cushion, I got to know it better, which of course I could never do when I was fighting it. I got to actually know it better and see what it was like, and feel it, experience it. And as we get to know something better, we get to know the patterns, the effects, and you start to see more clearly the ways in which it might be clouding our vision. So it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but in a way, it's almost like seeing something blurry with more clarity. All right? So it's not that there isn't still some blurriness, but we can see that there's blurriness and say, okay, there's blurriness here. Let's not maybe make any major decisions yet. Or if it's a decision that has to be made right now, there are some other ways we can go about it. We can write the stuff out in such a way that we're taking some of the fear element out. Try to look at it a little more objectively. Talk it over with somebody. Talk it over with more than one somebody. Get some outside feedback. Recognize, hey, I'm not in the best spot to make this decision right now. Let me bounce it off somebody, right? So we can try to mitigate some of that blurry, while at the same time we're also learning how to see the blurry. It's challenging to work with because it kind of gets, the problem itself gets in our way of resolving the issue, right? How do we get through this blurriness if everything looks blurry, right? And that's where this experimentation is so important. We have to be creative. We have to try different things and see what works. And again, that's going to be challenging if our ability to see is already compromised. So this isn't easy. But in my experience, it is workable. It is workable. And a lot of that just comes from being able to sit and see the stuff. See, okay, this is here and it may be affecting my ability to make a decision. Let's just see that. Because that might be the only option on the table at that moment. Your only option on the table at that moment might be I can either sit and watch this shit show or not. Right? Sometimes those are the only options on the table, is to observe this phenomenon that is happening and maybe learn something about it or not. And that might be the only option. So one of my early insights in this practice was don't let the lack of an ideal option stop you from choosing the best one available. So in that moment, we choose the best one available. All right, this is what's here. Let me check it out. See where that goes. Might lead somewhere, might not. But if we don't check it out, definitely not going to lead anywhere. We're just going to end up back in that same spot again, right? So I hope you find that helpful, because that is a tough situation for sure. But I hope that gives you something to begin working with. Becky, I'm glad you liked this one today. Cheers. And yeah, you liked, it stopped being a problem when I quit making it one. That's honestly, that could probably be the title of my autobiography. If I ever sit down and write an autobiography, which is not in my plans, but if I did, that'd be a good working title, I think. Yeah. Amy, a different room, use my headphone, liked it on headphones. This is really good. I think having peeled back so many things, I now feel desperately exposed and vulnerable. And when I stop to meditate with the silence, I feel scared. The birth of my daughter a few years back was fairly traumatic. I remember feeling alone with people. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, vulnerability. Funny thing about vulnerability. There's a lot of ironies and paradoxes in this practice. And what I have found for myself, and this is a lesson I have to keep relearning because we don't like vulnerability and feeling exposed. So I have to keep relearning this one myself. I have found that there is so much power in vulnerability. I'm always talking about this, trying not to force tension away, right? Because we've got power and we've got force. Force is about trying to control. Right? We often confuse power and force, and we think that power means we can control things and control other people. No, that's not power. That's force. Genuine power. I've found that one of the most genuine kinds of power is the ability to be vulnerable, to be exposed. Obviously not in ways that aren't safe. I mean, we need to have boundaries and so forth. You don't just go running into traffic or, what have you. But if we can be okay with feeling vulnerable, what could possibly make us not feel okay? right? If we're willing to be open, if we're willing to be exposed, if we're willing to be vulnerable, that really cuts out about 90% of, as Becky said here, it stopped being a problem when I quit making it one. We have a problem with vulnerability because, vulnerability, I could be in danger, right? So again, we're not doing stupid shit, but even just the willingness to be vulnerable, to say, let people see us fuck up now and then, all right? Man, that takes a lot off the table, right? Oh, I have to worry about that, and I have to worry about that, and I have to worry, and people see this, and no, all of a sudden you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's like, oh, no, I can let people see that. Oh, take my history, for example. My anxiety, my panic, my depression, all that stuff, that was my deep, dark secret for almost 10 years. I didn't tell anybody about this shit. You kidding me? This was under lock and key. I couldn't imagine the time would come when I'd be like doing the stuff that I'm doing. I'm out teaching this stuff. Basically my shit's out there for the world to say, hey, look, this is what happened. Here's what, and I'm still, I'm not cured. I still have anxiety. I still, this is why I engage in the practice, right? And what I found was when I started talking about it, when I started opening up about it, I kind of couldn't stop. It actually feels really good. It feels really good. And part of the reason it feels really good is because we end up hearing from so many other people. It's like, oh, good Lord, me too, and me too. It's just, there's a whole world of us thinking we're the only ones. And this is why we're so afraid to be vulnerable and feel exposed. But then when we do it, other people gravitate to that and say, oh, good Lord, yes, thank you for sharing. Yes, I don't feel so alone anymore. Again, there's a fight there that we're bringing. And there's a phrase I like to say sometimes, which is that truly powerful warriors need no weapons. Again, power, not force. Forceful warriors have all kinds of weapons. Powerful warriors don't need weapons. So thank you for sharing that. I hope that helps. Cheers. Yeah, Amy, and that's a good point too. When we feel vulnerable about something, this is a really important point, and this is one of the things that makes it so challenging. One of the things I like to say is we're not passive recipients of our experience, right? When something comes up, internally or externally, our interpretation of that, our perception of that, that's happening against a whole lifetime of experience, fears, desires, judgments, whatever, right? We're bringing something to that experience, which affects how we experience it. And then that affects what we do with it, which affects what comes up next. And this is karma. This is what the Buddha's talking about when he's talking about karma, right? So if we're in a certain situation where we feel like we might be overexposed, we're vulnerable in a way that is making us feel anxious or something, we're not just feeling the vulnerability of that moment. It's awakening memories of every other time we felt vulnerable in our lives, right? They all come rushing at us. And it's like this avalanche of like, oh shit, right? And it's just completely out of proportion to whatever that current situation might be, right? We don't just feel the vulnerability of that moment. We feel a lifetime of vulnerabilities. All of a sudden, like, we're back in that hospital room. Are we in the hospital? No. Were we even actually unsafe in that hospital room? Maybe, maybe not, right? I'm not saying you perhaps weren't, but I'm just saying as an example, even the vulnerability that we might be recalling from a previous experience might not have been an accurate assessment of that situation, but we're still bringing it with us into this situation. And that's coloring our assessment of this situation. And then how we deal with that is going to color our assessment of the next time we might feel vulnerable. Again, This is how we are bringing something to an experience which shapes how we experience whatever that is, and it continues. This is our cause and effect cycle. This is our karma. This is what we're here to see. This is what we're here to begin to unravel a bit and say, okay, what can I change here? What's the best way to experiment with this? How do I put better causes and conditions in place to have better effects so I'm not getting in my own way so much? So I'm not looking for all these fights that, oh, hey, I'm finding. What happens when I stop doing that? Oh, shit. Wow. What the hell have I been doing that for so long for? All right? That's what we're here to do. From Anne, what especially resonated with me was when you said it's an inquiry where we don't have to immediately have the answer. And that's one of our big problems, right? Again, this is why we don't like vulnerability and so forth. We don't like uncertainty, right? As humans, we don't like uncertainty. So we're always trying to get that answer. And we're trying to get that answer now because we don't want uncertainty. Where there's uncertainty, there could be danger, right? And so a huge part of this is being willing to sit with uncertainty. And one of the monks that I quote a lot, Thanissaro Bhikkhu, he says, this practice is more about learning how to ask the right questions rather than coming armed to it with all the answers in advance. And again, it's an interesting turn of phrase, coming armed with the answers in advance, like weapons, right? Armed. This is really the art of learning how to ask the right questions. And in my experience, the answers come. We don't get to say what they're going to be. We don't get to say when they're going to come, how we're going to experience them. It's not up to us. That's not something we can control. So again, trying to get those answers is force, control. Being willing to just ask the questions, that's power. That's power. Yeah, Greg, a constant uncertainty. It can grind you down. As we often say, this practice is simple but not easy. And some of what makes it not easy is keeping it simple. One of the things I talk about sometimes is this consistency, persistence, what the Buddha called ardency in our practice. And I like to think of it in the way that water over time wears down rock. It's not beating the shit out of the rock. It's a gentle, ongoing persistence that over time wears it away. So sometimes it's a matter of just persistent simplicity with something that may feel unpleasant. It doesn't mean we're not going to experience things that are painful, but the Buddha didn't teach how to stop feeling pain. We can't do that. He taught how to stop experiencing suffering. And suffering is what arises when we don't deal with pain skillfully. Pain we don't have a choice about. Suffering's on us. So the better we get at learning how to experience the phenomenon of something painful, uncomfortable, unpleasant, and work with that, the less suffering we add on top. That's what all those fights that we go looking for and finding are. That's suffering. That's pushing into the balloon and having it smack us back in the face. That's force. That's suffering. The initial fear of the balloon, that's pain. But then how we deal with that affects our experience of it. Like for me, when I went from seeing it as something that was suffocating me to something that was supporting me, I was like, oh, holy shit. Interesting. Balloon didn't change. Room didn't change. I changed. My willingness to experience it changed. And then the entire experience itself then changed. And if I end up with another room and another balloon at some point in the future, I'm going to have a very different experience. I'm going to open right up to it, most likely. Again, that's karma. All right, everyone. I think I'll wrap it up there. We're coming up on just about an hour. Check out your balloons today, folks. See what you got. Thank you all so much, everybody. Great to see you. See you again soon. Cheers.